Welcome to the Field Lab podcast. We know that you're all here because you're passionate about health, learning about true health. Maybe it's keeping your health, maybe it's finding your health, maybe it's helping someone else with their health. We all have different reasons why we're here. If you run a human day connected to a really good environment that's filled with light, water, magnetism, that's filled with love and community, that is how humans default to health. Today's topic was actually chosen by the Field Lab community. When asked what they wanted to hear on the podcast, one topic stood out: blood pressure. I wasn't surprised, as this topic comes up many times over a work week. Having high blood pressure is a major source of fear and anxiety, and no wonder we are constantly told that hypertension will result in a heart attack or stroke. This is unfortunate because, as a single metric for health, blood pressure performs quite poorly. At best, it's a hint, but only when seen through a biophysical lens. The goal in this episode is to shed light on that story in an effort to turn fear into wisdom that supports true health. In part one, we define the problem, explain why our modern framework on this issue breeds fear, not understanding, and help you integrate a new framework, one that empowers you to be wiser. Part two is where the fun science comes out. Though it's a terrible metric for health, blood pressure is actually a really cool and easy lens for exploring the biophysics of the nervous system and the vascular system. If you'd like to hear part two and shape the future of the podcast, join the community using the link in the bio. And of course, if you know someone burdened by the fear of blood pressure, help them turn it into wisdom by sharing this discussion. Now let's dive into the episode.
So we're doing the blood pressure conversation, which is one that comes up quite a bit because there is a lot of fear around it. And there's also a lot of change in the standards and the measurements and how people are perceiving their blood pressure and where it fits into their perception of their health. So I think we should start by defining blood pressure and talking about what does that actually mean, because it's another one of those terms that we throw around quite a bit, but I don't think people actually take a moment to internalize it.
All right, so let's have this be our part one of blood
Okay.
pressure
It's gonna need
and
a
hypertension. So we're kind of talking about hypertension as a diagnosis, which it's an interesting conversation because it's probably one of those most common centralized medicine kind of gateway diagnoses that was chosen really around the 1970s. We did peek back because we were trying to refresh our memories about standards, and like the first kind of official clinically diagnosable standard was around that 1977 time. We've talked about in medicine blood pressure going way back, but a definable moment that became really treatable that kind of created this whole fear paradigm around blood pressure. So blood pressure, though, in most patients' minds, so always going back to like what do patients think blood pressure is, unfortunately, for a lot of people, it's a number.
Yeah, it's just simply like a moment in time in
Yes.
a doctor's office. It doesn't mean anything.
And then, I'm fortunate to be able to have conversations with patients, and I'll ask them, or sometimes they'll ask me, I have high blood pressure. I went to my annual exam. It's one of the things that gets monitored in any real, like a doctor's visit. Sometimes you're even getting it monitored in a dentist's office these days. You can go to Walmart and go in the machine, or CVS. Like, it's been
Do it at home.
definitely like implanted in a normal mindset of at least the American population that you should know your blood pressure. And if this number is, technically now we're in the last year at a moment. So from 1977 to 2025, the normal was kind of set. That had been lowered from previous normals. Now it's been lowered once again, kind of with this general conversation of like normal is really less than 120 over less than 80.
Hmm.
Now, anything above it is supposedly a concern. I say supposedly because everything about blood pressure we're going to talk about is very contextual. And then it gets treatable now at a range lower than before, which is 130 over 80 now. Whereas before it was 140 over 90 was absolutely treatable. And, we're in this moment where, as many things are in medicine, like the ranges keep getting lower and lower and lower. It's it's hard from a decentralized medicine standpoint to have a lot of faith in that because even if there's a scientific study, these studies are done in labs and in isolation and not in humans in their natural environments.
Right.
So we've really lost touch with what that even means. But I really want to be clear because how I see it with patients is they think of blood pressure as a number and really not beyond that. Haven't always questioned like what is blood pressure? Why does it matter?
Yeah. Why are they so afraid?
Yeah, they're afraid that if their blood pressure is above 120 over 80, they're gonna have a heart attack.
Hmm.
Like, that's probably the most common worry and fear,
Right.
and I know, there when humans start getting into the medical model, it is all about fear of what's gonna kinda take you out,
Hmm.
and we've done a really good job putting that blood pressure number at the top. But it's very rare that I have patients fully understand the complexity of blood pressure.
I know we've simplified it to such a degree that it's
Yeah,
like
but it's a
almost,
number.
yeah, it's,
So, I don't even care if it's above 120 over 80. I'm going to be worried about it and I'm going to consider treating it.
mhm.
Now, treating can be a lot of things. It can be beyond, prescription drugs. But then there's always the question. It's like treating a high cholesterol. Do you really want to treat something that your body is presenting to you as an output
Mhm.
of probably something gone wrong?
Right. What's it protecting you from? What's it adapting
Yeah.
to?
So I just want to be clear of like how I see it in practice. Like what's really showing up in my office is this worry around a number. Definitely knowing, most people have some awareness of they're putting a blood pressure cuff on. It's measuring pressure in their blood vessels and really are not thinking about it beyond that.
Mhm.
Instead of the doctors, especially primary cares, being able to explain like this is a really complex metric that when you look deep into these numbers, like what does it really mean? It's telling you the pressure of the blood in a vessel, but it's a reading of so much more.
Mhm.
Like what's the volume of your blood? What's the viscosity of your blood? What kind of atoms are floating around in your blood? What's the elasticity of your blood vessel? What's the lining doing? Is there nitric oxide production? Do you have calcifications that are preventing that? Like all of a sudden you realize, holy moly, like this is actually a really complex number. Maybe I should learn something about that.
Mhm.
So I I wish I could tell you like I make this like a teachable moment for every patient. And I think this is why we're doing the podcast because it's it's just a very long conversation, and in the office, I don't have hours to be able to spend with patients to be able to explain this to them, even though the patients I have had this conversation with are super interested in learning, and I know many of our patients are interested in learning.
Mhm.
It's just like we find that it's a real time factor, and, this is why we're trying to share it in this space to be able to bring more knowledge to how can we take these things that we've made really well known. We now have made most of the American population aware of blood pressure. And of course, we've made it that people are afraid of high blood pressure, but we're trying to reframe it as maybe this is a teaching moment to understand like what is blood pressure in the normal state of a normal human, a human running strong redox potential, a human connected to a decentralized environment, like then that should be what we're all taught to understand. So that way, if your blood pressure reading, you're taking it and it's abnormal, you could take that context and actually make sense of it. Where have you taken your blood pressure? When have you taken your blood pressure? What time of the day have you taken your blood pressure? Like these things matter. What position are you taking your blood
Mhm.
pressure in? Like, oh my gosh, these things really, really matter. But most of my patients come in because they've gone to their primary care. All the blood pressure readings are generally done at the beginning of the visit. It's if you're worried about your blood pressure, you cannot take your mind out of the worry. And now you've got all these factors that kind of put you into certainly a stress related situation.
Mhm.
So your blood pressure can tell you a bit about your stress response systems.
Right.
Clearly, it's not working great.
No.
Now, traditional medicine has said we've got a, a pharmacology solution for you. But that's an interesting story too, which I think we'll break down. Like, there's multiple classes of drugs to lower blood pressure. So that proves the complexity of blood pressure.
Mhm.
If you can take multiple classes and all can have a lowering effect, then you know that blood pressure isn't just a number.
Right. There's so much more that goes
There's
into it.
so much more that goes into it.
Mhm.
I mean, we've even had patients who have been on every class of the drugs layered and still have high blood pressure.
Mhm.
So, sometimes we do not have the patients that are coming in with their initial diagnoses, like looking for a solution.
Mhm.
Sometimes they are, but they're still in the mindset of, I want to lower my blood pressure. So, again, maybe we should like move to like, why is that maybe not the best thinking?
Mhm.
How do you kind of learn the normal state so then you can compare what's happening, to that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Does that
Yeah.
kind of bring it all together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think it's fair to say blood pressure is like almost one of the most surface level final outputs of everything the system's doing? Like it's one of the most surface level metrics we can be focused on, which is so perfect for centralized
I
medicine
know. I
because
mean, it did become an easy target.
Mhm.
Of all the things that became available to monitor, I mean, pre like biohacking and pre devices and pre technology, I mean, monitoring blood pressure was one of the more simple things to measure
Mhm.
that then became part of a annual visit, but then every visit, again,
Mhm.
I don't know the history of it other than I started medical school in 2002. I did, my pre-med as a dietitian in 2000. I know in 2000 when I started working in a clinical setting as a student, blood pressures were being regularly monitored at that point in the
Mhm.
year 2000. Always. I mean, I even learned to do blood pressures as a dietitian. Like it's like a huge part of centralized medicine.
Right.
But then this is a huge part of centralized functional medicine. It's just really again coming back to like defining centralized medicine. We've taken blood pressure.
Mhm.
I can say I never learned about blood pressure through the lens of biophysics, which I know I always go back to. Like I got taught those very basic metrics, down to the fact that blood pressure was complex, but mostly so you would know how to treat it.
Right.
Not so you would ever think as a medical student, I never thought, huh, like what's really happening here? Like,
Mhm.
why is this no longer the normal state of that human? And can the human get back to that normal state? I really cannot say I felt that way
Interesting.
because I was trained to treat it.
Mhm.
We get solutions. Now, granted, I was also taught like, maybe you start with diet, you start with weight loss, you exercise. Like, there's herbs for that.
Mhm.
There's solutions that aren't pharmacology solutions, but it's still reactive.
Mhm.
It's still allowing one to be in fear of this high blood pressure instead of actually taking it as a moment of, hey, maybe the biophysics of me has gone bad.
Right. So in a perfect situation, in the normal state of the human, what should blood pressure look like? Maybe on kind of a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's think back to, humans, because I think the defining moment for this one is really, indoor lifestyle versus everything before
Everything
that.
else.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like pre-indoor lifestyle human, and you kind of look at that 1977 marker, the 70s were really a defining decade of, we learned so much about biology. But maybe purposely so, a lot of the science was around creating, clinical markers and things to treat. And it was also very perfectly timed, in this sort of post-war culture of comfort, of doing more things inside. We had
Mhm.
shifted our work to more inside. There were TVs, and all of a sudden now most of the day was being spent inside. And definitely the science pre 1977 really proved that we were going to have more of a blood pressure problem
Mhm.
because we were altering the initial solar signals that regulated it. And then once we put ourselves inside, now the human has to constantly adapt to indoor light stressors. And blood pressure is an output of how well that system is working and
Okay.
whether or not it's lost that adaptability.
Mhm. So blood pressure is tied to your light environment and should be regulated by your exposure to natural light over the course of a circadian day.
Blood pressure is absolutely a solar metric.
Mhm. And how are we interact like, how does that ultimately operate?
Yeah, so I mean, like let's talk about some of the relevant things that I think help my patients. When I'm trying to help my patients like understand and sort of unfear themselves around it, well, I'll always start with, hey, did you know that there's a rhythm of blood pressure that would be running autonomously and automatically for you in sync with the circadian day?
Mhm.
When you look at a 24-hour rhythm of blood pressures in humans, there's a general pattern that always emerges. Now, it makes sense. Let's face it, when we're awake during the day, we need enough blood pressure to make sure we can pump blood to our brain,
Mhm.
into our muscles, and everywhere it needs to go so we don't pass out, so we
Right.
can function. Like that's simplistically like what should be happening. So when you look at a circadian day, like you can see that. You can see it syncing with higher levels turning on. You can see it syncing with lower levels at night. But like how all these things happen are circadian regulated, which is important because really every human function goes back to circadian timekeeping at that underlying level.
Mhm.
So that helps our body to be adaptable, though, that there's an expectation of what should be. However, if you're a human and you're putting yourself into environments that are different. If you go for a run, if you go for a walk, if you're in a stress situation, if you're in a doctor's visit worried, like if you're in situations
Mhm.
that are maybe stressful, cell stressful, you can adapt your blood pressure
Right.
and you can measure it,
Right.
which is helpful if you know that it's not something we should initially have been taught to fear.
Mhm.
It's something we should have initially been taught to say, hey, this is kind of a cool biohacking metric
Right.
that if you were able to do something stressful and measure your blood pressure, if you understand the context that's happening in,
Mhm.
you can really understand, like, is my body adaptable to stress?
Mhm.
Because how great was it that the ancient human, say you lived in Maine, you saw a bear and you had to run, you better hope your blood pressure is going to go up.
Right.
But there was nobody that would have worried about their blood pressure being high and it causing a heart attack. Because it's, again, generally what we're told to think.
Mhm.
I have patients who literally think like if their blood pressure is 160 over 100, like they will have a heart attack.
Mhm.
And I'll explain to them, no, you actually better hope your systems of adaptability will make sure you actually do not die from that.
Exactly.
Everything about your POMC system should rally to
Mhm.
re-regulate this blood pressure. But so in the short term, you can run from the bear.
Mhm.
And that's what it was really meant for.
Right.
So, I mean, if you were a human pre, 1970s, you could test your blood pressure. And it's too bad. It probably would have been really cool for people to test their blood pressure in different environments. Test it in the morning, test it in the middle of the day, test it in the evening, test it when you wake up, test it after walking, test it after running, test it inside, test it outside, test it while you're looking at a computer screen, test it with sunglasses on, put your contacts in, put sunscreen on. Like, if you really wanted to go into a personal scientific mode, you could do all those things. And actually, you should see there's always going to be some different numbers.
Right.
And that's important and helpful.
Mhm.
You should see it lowest if you were outside and you've been outside and you tested those numbers throughout the day. Ultimately, that would sync with the normal circadian regulation. But if you then altered your body's ability to take in that message, so anything over your eyes, anything on your skin, that could change it.
Mhm.
Now, unfortunately, we no longer live in those times, right? So
Right.
so now I'm kind of clearly defining like that's the normal state of blood pressure. It should be adaptable. If you ran up a hill and took your blood pressure, you would hope it would be a little bit higher.
Mhm.
Now, granted, we're not talking about numbers that are extreme because then that would tell you that your system is not adaptable and therefore you should learn a little more about biophysics.
Right.
Not treat the blood pressure because ultimately treating the blood pressure will
Do nothing.
never give you a solution.
I mean, you're treating, like, literally the final output of a system gone bad,
Yeah, and
which
unfortunately
makes no
these
sense.
drugs like cause a lot of side effects.
Mhm.
They're definitely not neutral.
Right.
There's a rare moment I have a patient who doesn't notice the side effect. They tolerate the side effect because they perceive lowering the blood pressure will prevent their heart attack. So it's worth the fatigue. It's worth the peeing all day long. It's
Mhm.
worth whatever the side effect is for them.
Right.
But it doesn't solve a problem.
Right.
Like, that's the truth. Is like, okay, we want to then talk about solving the problem.
Mhm.
Those are the deeper biophysical things. So I mean, we'll kind of save those for our part two. But I think it's really important to go back to, okay, clearly centralized medicine's done a really good job making people afraid of their blood pressures and getting it to be a treatable metric.
Mhm.
Again, we're only seeing patients from the naturopathic side. So we generally have patients who are coming to us that are looking for alternative options.
Mhm.
They're generally a little more health focused. So I say that because I can't tell you this 100% because I've never done the data, but probably of all classes of medications that are like is perceived as being, safe and not really a problem are the blood pressure medications.
Mhm.
I have a lot of my patients who are older who have taken blood pressure medications truly because they got a blood pressure measurement in a doctor's office that was above the standard and they got put into the algorithm and they started the drug.
Right.
Really, it's sometimes nothing beyond that. No, like, hey, I should do some tests. I should do a Holter monitor. I should do like 24-hour blood pressure. I mean, it's
So it's just, like,
absolutely a gateway.
one measurement, and
Mhm.
they're on
Yeah, and they're on it.
medication.
So, I have some of my older patients, especially like in their 80s and 90s, like I would say that blood pressure medications are something that are considered pretty neutral.
Mhm.
Now, I would say, no class of drug is neutral, but also force lowering something like a blood pressure metric then does eliminate your ability to hear what your body is telling you about your reaction to your environment.
Right.
So now, if you've artificially lowered a blood pressure, you've gotten rid of a signal of your body telling you about your environment.
Hmm.
And now, can you even really continue to adapt as a human?
Right.
Then unfortunately, it can unfold. I say gateway because then it can unfold into what goes next. Then it might be metabolism, diabetes, and then it's just this gateway of like, oh gosh, I have this next thing I need to treat.
Hmm.
And, we have a lot of patients who come to us at that point. It's just unfortunate that we have not, decentralized our knowledge about human health and taken metrics like this and taught kids what it means.
Right. It's disappointing,
A
unfortunately.
little bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot
Quite a
disappointing
bit.
that we could do better. We
For
should
sure.
do better.
Right.
And it's an easy, non-invasive metric
Hmm.
that we need to do better with.
Right. Is circadian timekeeping all that's lost in people with hypertension or blood pressure issues, or is there more to the story?
Always more to the story. I mean, I know we always come back to now you kind of have to, as a human, expect that there might be some circadian stress to your own personal health if you've not seen every sunrise, blocked artificial blue light at night, like heated seasonal change, seasonal eating. Like if that's not been the way, which is let's be honest, like everyone,
Right.
right?
That's the
So
one.
so the assumption you have to make for yourself is okay, it probably had some circadian stress. Now that's not always the case.
Mm.
We have defined that there are context dependent humans where
Right.
if you were endowed a really good capacity from mom and grandma, you developed good circadian timekeeping in the beginning of your life, you could be not doing circadian ways of
Practices.
life
Yeah.
and actually have good circadian function. And frankly, those are the patients who could probably be doing everything wrong. Their blood pressure is great.
Right.
Which I have patients that come in, they'll always say, like, I'm so healthy, my blood pressure is great.
Hmm.
There are those patients. There are those people.
Right.
It's good to know, though, if that's you.
Mhm.
Again, like coming back to, this is the personal journey for everybody. It's good to know that that's you, but also good if that starts to go, then maybe that indicates that your circadian
Starting
rhythmicity
to
is
slip
starting
a
to go.
little. Yeah.
But that is definitely at the core of a lot of people is
Mhm.
that there is some circadian dysregulation. Once that starts to go, especially within the hypothalamus, now that allows the cells to more isolated kind of deal with stressors. So now you're leaning a little more on your skin surfaces, you're leaning a little more on your gut surfaces, and then if that's not great,
Mhm.
now you may have more blood pressure dysregulation.
Okay.
But then it can be affected at every level. You could have poor blood viscosity. You could have poor blood volume.
Mhm.
You could be like I mean some patients everyone gets so afraid of salt that they actually may have low blood volume because they've eliminated every bit of salt from their diet.
Right.
I know it's opposite of the paradigm, but this is what I see in practice is that we've really confused the human because those are metrics that we came upon pre-modern indoor human.
Mhm.
If you go back in the studies, all of like the really old, like the studies were done really pre-modern human. And I say like modern human, like
Yeah.
LED driven,
Mhm.
excessively indoor, babies born with lack of circadian function. So those ideas just have to level up
Right.
because then people get really critical and there is more chance of calcification, calcification deeper than the cholesterol story, really that story of deuterium and cell stress and all, that's so meaningful. But now if you have every layer, going back to that original definition, it's like
Mhm.
if you have every layer of what regulates blood pressure potentially impacted, of course we're going to be in a situation where generally people's blood pressures, when you go into a doctor's office,
Mhm.
you're getting it taken at the beginning of your visit. Every regular medical office is loaded with artificial blue light, like, and you're stressed. You're probably going to have a blood pressure
That's
above
high. Yeah.
the acceptable level.
Right.
And now you can be treated for it, and frankly, you have to be treated for it.
Mhm.
Like, it's really, it's I think a lot of doctors, when you're in a system, most doctors are employed by a system. You now are agreeing to being in the centralized medical model.
Mhm.
It's not really their fault. Like, they literally have to
They're bound
prescribe
by
you a
this.
drug because they're agreeing to the rules that
Right.
they're practicing under,
Absolutely.
which is so unfortunate because I do not believe every doctor wants to always prescribe the drugs,
No.
but that is really the algorithm-based solution.
Mhm.
And then, of course, everything in the insurance model is tied to that.
Right.
You have a diagnosis now, you need to treat it,
Mhm.
and everything like it's wrapped into that.
Right.
So it's kind of a doom loop of fear,
Mhm.
of of simplifying something that's way more complex, but actually really cool when you think about it through the lens of biophysics. Like, you can learn something from it. And once you learn about it, you may very well finally free yourself from the fear, but kind of use it as a metric of getting your true health back.
Right. And I think you hit on something else that we talk a lot about, which is that these labs and measurements are not a representation of true health because you can lower your blood pressure and that might work to create a specific output, but you're in the background, your deeper cellular health is unfortunately
Not
lost.
healthier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really around everything. I mean, you can lower your blood pressure. It tells you
We don't have any
actually
more,
nothing
no more
about,
redox, no more
yeah, if you've
circadian
just
drive.
taken a drug that's forced lowering it, you've not restored anything about those pieces and parts that made it wrong to begin with.
Right.
So, like, that's already a problem. But now, it's again, like, it's this gateway to worry about everything else. Normally it gets tied to cholesterol. So now you may lower cholesterol artificially. Same thing. Does that give you more health?
Mhm.
You might have a high fasting blood sugar. You might take a drug for that. It might in your lab come back lower. Same thing.
Right.
Now, if you've lowered your cholesterol because you've cleaned up all the artificial light going in your eyes and
Mhm.
you're getting more UV light to regulate it, which is the regulator, now you might use a lab and it get better.
Right.
You might use your blood pressure and get better. So hopefully this is the moment where we can say using these tools, like using lab markers, using a blood pressure can be really helpful,
Mhm.
but only if you understand the biophysics and the context of you to then use them to empower you
Right.
versus driving, actually just taking the
Like
drug.
compliance.
Compliance to the drugs, more drugs. If the blood pressure's not lowered on the diuretic, then you take a beta blocker. If it's not lowered on that, you take the calcium channel blocker or the ACE inhibitor. Oh, you might get a cough, so you switch to something else. And it's, it's really disappointing because you're just reminding me, like, of probably all of the medication tinkering. That's probably the one diagnosis that gets tinkered with the most, like, patients will tolerate,
Hmm.
feel like garbage while you're trying to lower this blood pressure. And I don't know how to say, like, I would just disconnect from it because the reality is there isn't a lot of blood pressure that's causing immediate heart attacks.
Is it something you worry about with patients?
I do not.
I've never heard you talk about it
I know.
or take anybody's blood pressure.
I mean, in 20 years, I can say that those cases of, I mean, I can't think of any case that had a high blood pressure episode and that was the cause of their death.
Mm,
I mean, it just doesn't happen in reality, but
right.
people think that.
Mhm.
That is what you can be a healthy human and you're gonna have a high blood pressure and no matter like you will instantly die.
Right.
And actually the my argument there would be if that happens to you, it does not mean you're healthy. Which
Exactly.
comes back to like we have a lot of patients say, oh gosh, like that patient or that person in the gym, they look great, they work out, and they died of a heart attack. They were so healthy.
Right.
These are not healthy humans,
Exactly.
unfortunately, which is like really tough. And I know we always go back to if that happens, you this is not a healthy state.
No.
What we're talking about though is kind of using this conversation to then reframe
Mhm.
and say, no, the human vascular system is super adaptable
On purpose.
on purpose.
Mhm.
Like it goes really deep back to the Palm Sea, the solar story, like human uniqueness. I mean, it's the deeper story, really kind of defined by an easy centralized medical metric
Exactly.
that was twisted and treated and ultimately has kept patients confused, but in fear. And I really don't use it as a huge metric when I'm working with patients because I'm trying to disconnect them from the fear. If they've already come in, they have their diagnoses, they're on their blood pressure meds, I do not tell them to immediately lower their vents. Like that's not my approach. I use it to teach them, hey, the biophysics of you is broken. Let's get that right.
Mhm.
Let's restore your circadian function. Let's get the biophysics back. Let's make sure the biophysics of your blood vessels are working and your surfaces work to then program and tell nitric oxide how to work, which ultimately will allow your blood vessels to be flexible
Right.
locally, but all through the light signal.
Mhm.
Now, I've had patients of course, I'm working with patients, I kind of know the ones that are more biophysically robust versus the ones that are not. A lot of my 60 plus patients are, again, if you're following along, you know why we think that way. And I'll have like I've done this more than once where I'll tell patients, hey, you know what? Take your blood pressure cuff. Like do the blood pressure inside, go outside, spend 10 minutes out there, make sure the light's out, do it in the morning, kind of like let your body get some of that transitional light, test it. Do it a few days. Do it in the morning, do it at night, like kind of get some readings. Tell me if your outdoor readings are better than your indoor readings. And these are I'll wait until I've worked with patients long enough that I've helped them to understand why they need light in their eyes, why they need to not put sunscreen on, like why they need to get their surface correct. Like once that's working for them,
Mhm.
I have never not had a patient that sees those values lower. Now, sometimes it's not as dramatic, which means there's more, again, to the story that needs to be corrected. But ultimately, that is the truth of blood pressure is a solar story.
And it's proof positive that our modern environments are horrible for us.
And it's proof positive that our modern environments are not running our human POMC system
Mhm.
the way it was designed to work.
And that's the
It's
takeaway we should not.
overstressed, it's now degraded, it may be atrophied, and therefore everything that should be happening that should allow us to adapt to stressors by raising our blood pressure in the short term is now just chaos.
Exactly.
So, is that I know we talked about a lot of things. We wrote a lot of notes there. I think we got to, maybe we should be just to tie it up in a bow here, that everyone wants solutions, so it's the pharmacology solution, it's the supplement solution. So there's the solution to lower the blood pressure. Maybe in the short term, you need to do a little bit of that. Like if you've got really, really, really high blood pressure, if you're 200 over 100, maybe in the short term, you need those. We're not saying that you should not be aware of levels that are crazy.
Mhm.
Now, I'm saying it that way because most people do not have those levels.
Right, that's
I'll have
not
patients come in and it's like, "Oh, I'm so worried. My blood pressure is so high." It's like they're worried about 140 over 90.
Mhm.
So, again, I want to be clear. This is not medical advice. Like, you want to be able to think smart in your context, but you don't want those things to be your solution.
Right.
Everyone then will come to me. We get a lot of patients coming to me. They want their diet. They want their exercise. They want to lose weight, and do they avoid salt? Like, these are the common metrics, but and I think I will say, like, how I approach it is not for everybody. Sometimes people just want those solutions,
Mhm.
but how I approach it is helping patients fix it at the biophysical level,
Mhm.
so they're not treating it
Right.
anymore.
Exactly.
Because that's just the flip of how we want patients to think.
And the solution there is to restore your circadian day. It sounds
Yes.
like it's not a diet solution.
Yeah, like, you need your body to be sensing your environment,
Mhm.
but then in sync with that, so your internal light and magnetic environment is working for you.
Right.
Because yes, we should be clear that a lot of times, if you're new to us, you might be thinking, "Well, this makes no sense. Like, everyone lives indoors."
Mhm.
So clearly it can't just be a solar story on its own. However, most people don't realize you have your internal solar story
Mhm.
that is really defining this deeper story, which needs to be our part too. Like,
So that's where we're going now.
that's too complex for this
Yeah.
conversation, but it's a solar story.
But not complex in the sense that you can't understand it.
No, it's actually really
It's
easy.
actually super easy
Yeah.
once you see how the
Okay.
parts
I,
and
I think that's
pieces.
important too. That I always forget. Like, generally getting a lot of feedback that maybe this is like, I'm not ready for this. Like, this is
Right.
really complicated. Gosh, I can't dive into part two because it seems really complicated.
It's not what
Let's
we're
be
saying.
clear. Like, no, we're actually saying it's much easier
Mhm.
than sitting back and not understanding what blood pressure is.
Right.
In fact, it's quite easy. And when you understand health through the lens of blood pressure, through the light story, like, it starts helping to make sense of everything else.
Mhm.
And like, once you hear this and then you hear the next thing, then you realize, gosh, this is a solar story.
Right.
This is a electromagnetic story.
Mhm.
And that is the deeper story of human health, that it's not just biochemistry. It's not just your blood pressure. This is information your body's telling you about your interaction with your environment, but where then the physics of you is lacking.
Right.
And so it's actually really a story of, like, how do you find your health again?
Mhm.
You can find it through learning about blood pressure.
And now you could be smarter than your doctor.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes. So okay, let's go on to part two.
Cool.
I think that's an important moment for people to hear, that if you're taking three different blood pressure lowering meds, like, what choice do you have other than to maybe, like, listen to these words and think, gosh, do I actually just need to do some human work here? As humans, need to actually take back our health.
Mhm.
But the only way to do that is we have to involve ourselves in the process.
Right.
A medication is taking proof of work out of the story.
Mhm.
Are stimulated via this light response through nitric oxide synthase to produce nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is what creates this proper flexibility of the blood vessel. So to be able to properly dilate with response to the light, to then allow blood to flow. We're now at the moment where our mitochondria have received the generational stress, and now it's really paired with 20 years of super altered light with then much more time indoors. And we're kind of at this critical moment where, I see the 20-somethings with high blood pressure.
Right.
Weight loss is the end result of restoring the physics of you. Normalized blood pressure is the end result. Like, these are the chronic diagnoses that are so fixable.